In this demonstration, we're going to take a look at some of the more advanced templating features of the Flask framework. I created a new folder called Templates, and inside I created an app.py file. And in this file, I will once again import items from the Flask library. And I'm going to bring in the Flask class, a method called render template, and the abort method. Also, we are going to create an app variable. And then we'll have our main block. I'm going to add some different code this time, however, to allow us to automatically reload the web server anytime we have made a change to our source code. So we have this Jinja environment auto reload equals true. What's Jinja? Well, looking on Wikipedia, Jinja is a template engine, and it's used specifically for web applications, for rendering HTML and serving up web pages. Now, the version of Jinja that we are using is currently version 2. That's automatically brought down if you get the latest version of Flask. So Jinja is the tool set we're using to render our web pages, which you'll see shortly when we do the render template. Then we're going to set a configuration item in the app, and it's going to be templates auto reload. We'll set that equal to true. Now this is basically a dictionary of configuration items that Flask and Jinja will both look at, and it will allow us to have these web pages refresh without having us to have to stop the web service every time we make a change. So these are the two things we're using to signal that we are going to allow those inline changes. Now, this isn't something that you should necessarily do in production, but in a debug environment where you're making frequent changes, then it makes a lot of sense. Then we're going to indicate that we're in debug mode when we run our application, and I will set the host equal to our loopback adapter. And this would be enough to get our website running again. Now, for every demo, I'm not going to go through the process of setting this up because this doesn't change that much each time, but when it does, I will point out those changes. Next, what I want to do is create a list of people objects. And to do that, I'm going to create a dictionary. I'm not actually going to create formal classes for each of the persons that are in here. Again, a dictionary is going to satisfy our needs just fine. So here is our people dictionary, and we're going to use the key. It's an ID essentially, and I'll repeat the ID inside the dictionary itself, which is another dictionary. So we have an element in the dictionary with the key of 1 through 9, and then it points to another dictionary which contains an ID member, a last name member, and a first name member. And in this dictionary I have 3 of these. Now, in a real web-based application, this would be a database. But we're trying to simplify the code a little bit so you can focus specifically on the web-based information rather than database coding because, again, that'll add a layer of complexity. But yes, you could easily take the code I'm presenting now and use a database backend. Okay, first route I'm going to add is going to be for the root of our application. I'll call it index. Typically either call this method index or home. And I'm not going to do anything special here. I'm just going to return text that says home page. That's it. Then I'm going to create another one. This time it's going to be hello. And I'll define a method. Might as well just call it hello. There's no reason not to. And this time I'm going to say return render template, and then I have to provide a template name. Typically this is going to be an HTML page, so I'm going to tell this to return a template called hello HTML. Now, one of the problems we have here, besides the fact that I don't know how to spell hello, is that we don't have this file in our file system yet. And it has to go in a very special location. You can't just put it anywhere. If you are going to render a template, we are going to put it within the templates folder. So I'm going to create that by right-clicking here and saying new folder, and I'll call it templates as such. So you can see the hierarchy. We have templates as the parent folder. There is a subfolder called templates, not very creative. And then inside of there, we're going to create these HTML files. So I'll say new file, and I'll call it hello.html. You'll notice now the icon changes here. Instead of looking like a little python, the two little snakes, now we have the left and right angle braces. And in here, we're going to put our HTML for this page. Now, this doesn't have to be anything special. And I know normally you would start an HTML page with the HTML tag. And yes, that is kind of a requirement. But the good news is most browsers will take care of that for us right now. As we get more advanced, I'll start showing you techniques for using partial rendering where we would have a parent layout HTML file and we would have the HTML tag in there and the body tag and links to CSS files, but that's for a later example. So I'll just say you displayed the hello HTML template. Okay, so far if I go back to app.py, we don't have very much in here yet. We have a route, that's the root of the application, and then we have the one in the hello resource. We're not using people just yet. I'll save that for a future run. So let's go ahead and change into the correct folder. And then we will change into templates. Make sure I see everything. We see app.py and templates. Then let's go ahead and run this. Okay, notice here we have debug mode on, which is possibly new based on whether or not you've turned debug mode on before. And then I can bring up this web address. So I will go ahead and bring up my web browser again, and then I will change to 127.0.0.1.5000 as the port. And you'll see here it says home page. Notice here it took the space and it doesn't render it because it is going to ignore all white space. It's a typical behavior for raw text being placed into HTML. We'd have to put a non-breaking space in there. But now I can go to a different path. And you can see it says hello there in the header 1 style. and then you display the hello HTML template. So we are now able to start offloading some of the front end rendering where it should be, which is in HTML files, instead of having it all here, which is on the web service itself. This is called a separation of concerns. So our web server that we are hosting in Python should only be concerning itself with handling requests being made from the outside world, finding the appropriate resource, and then depending on the type of resource, either returning raw text, maybe it's returning JSON, or maybe it's returning HTML. In this case, we do have that happening here with the render template. But we also kept all of the hard coded HTML out of the Python, because then we could just create a string with the H1 and the P tags. We could do that right here in a string, but then we are putting too much of the front end inside of what this is technically the back end. Okay, so this is our web service. So this is a good way to start separating your layers. Now let's start playing with this people collection. What happens if we wanted to see all of the people? So we could create a new route, and I'll say app.route. And then you'll notice as I'm making changes, and when the file saves, it attempts to restart the server. Now the problem is, when it saved it, it automatically caused it to crash the server because I didn't finish typing what I needed to, and it resulted in a syntax error. So what you can do, and I have autosave turned on, and that's really what the problem is, you can go to your File Preferences, Settings, and change your autosave delay to maybe 10 seconds after you stop typing. Okay, I just went to the File, Preferences, Settings to get here. Or you could actually just turn it off completely. Okay, maybe you change it to when you focus change or on window change. Okay, so we can wait for 10 seconds, or I'll set it back to 2 seconds, which is my preference, and just turn this off for right now. So I'll have to do a Control S to make sure I save the files as I go. Okay, so we're going to create the new route, and we will call this one Get People. And this one we're going to again return render template. Now I'm going to create another template, and it's not going to be called hello HTML. I'll call it people.html. But I'm going to pass it something this time, and then you'll see where the Jinja template engine take over, because we can start putting more sophisticated code inside of the HTML to actually process data. So I'm going to pass it a variable called people. I'll just assign it to our people dictionary. Then I'll go back to the templates and I'll add a new file, and I'll call this people.html. Now in people.html, what I want to do is display all of these people in a table. And to do that, I can use for loops, and I can utilize the individual people dictionaries that are inside of, or the individual person dictionary, sorry, that are inside of the people dictionary to do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is put another H1 tag, and I'll say people. I'll also make that capital. And then I'm going to create a table. And the table is going to have a header row. So let's put in the table headers. And this value will be ID, last name, and first name. Now, if HTML is not your thing and you're not following exactly what I'm doing here, that's okay. This is why I put this lesson where it is. It's kind of bonus material. It's something if you're ever going to get into web design or web programming, this is just going to give you a head start. Okay, we're going to take a look at how we can start making our Python applications more accessible, and one of the ways is to put a front end on it. Okay, so what I need to do now is I need to create the rows for each of the individual people in the people dictionary that we passed to this template. Remember, if you go back to @py, that's what this is right here. When we said render the template, we're saying I want you to render it using this people object. And I could put as many objects on this in this command as I need, but right now I only need the people dictionary. So then I'm going to want to loop through each of the people. This is where a special syntax comes in, where I use the curly brace % symbol, and that indicates to Jinja that it needs to do something here. In this case, I'm telling it needs to do a for loop. And the loop is going to be written very much like it would in Python. Okay, and this is similar to other web frameworks, like with C#, for instance. With MVC, you might have the Razor engine. Okay, so it's very similar, and we're just basically injecting runnable code within this HTML. This runnable code itself, that curly brace with the %sign, that doesn't get rendered to the HTML. This is just an instruction for Jinja to do the for loop that I'm specifying. So I'm saying for person in people, because that's the name of the dictionary I passed, dot values. Now, unlike Python, where you'd have a colon at the end and you'd indent everything, we actually have to give a clear delimiter here for the end of the for loop, which is end for. So it's going to execute this loop once for every person in the people dictionary. So when it runs, the first item returned will be this dictionary. The second one will be this dictionary, and the third one will be this dictionary. And it would be the same as if this was, instead of a dictionary of dictionaries, it could have been a dictionary of class objects or a list of class objects. It doesn't really matter. This is just what I picked for this example. Then I want to render another row. I'm going to copy the TR from above, and the big difference is instead of THs, we're going to have TDs. So I'll change all these to TDs. Make sure I fix the close tags as well. So we have the table data or the cell data. We have TR for table rows. And then, oops, see, I got to be careful when I'm talking, when I'm typing. I end up typing what I'm thinking and not what I should be. Okay, so each of the cells in this row are TDs. Each row is a TR. And then we have table. There's also the T-body. We don't need to worry about that. That's automatically added by the renderer. Okay, so we have all of our TDs. But now I want it to use the data within the person dictionary to populate the TDs. What I'll do is I will put these double curly braces, which is the escape sequence for Jinja to look for whatever it is I'm typing and substitute in place. So if I type in person.id, it will look inside of this object for the ID member. And it's smart enough to know if it's a dictionary and I say .id, it'll call its indexer. The next one will be last name. And then finally, first name. I'm just going to give it a quick once over and make sure it looks okay. So far, so good. I'll save that file, go back to appy and save this file, and then I'll kick off the web engine. Okay, it looks like we have a problem somewhere. Let's see if we can find it. Oh, I forgot to actually put the route in here. Don't make that mistake. I didn't tell it where to go. So we will try that again. Hopefully that, oh, make sure you save it. I forgot I turned off autosave. Okay, then I'll bring the browser back up and make sure hello is still working. Okay, that's working. Now let's go to person. As you can see here, it printed out the people header and then the table. Now the styling is terrible. This is just the default user agent style sheet that the browser comes with. It's using Times New Roman or Times Roman. Not exactly the best looking web font around, but you can tell it did render it as a table. You can definitely see that. So what we've done essentially is created dynamic HTML based on the data that's stored inside of that dictionary, and it builds this table from that data. If there was no people in that collection, then it wouldn't print anything here. And here's an example of changing values on the fly here. You can see that it'll rebuild. It'll rebuild the pages that have changed on the fly. So let's just change this person's name, and we'll say Jill. Okay, so then when I hit save, watch what happens on the bottom. You can see detecting change in app.py, reloading. If I go back to the web page and hit refresh, you'll see now we have that fourth person in here. But we can also put one more route in here to handle a specific person instead of all people. So I'll say app.route. This time I will attempt not to forget the route itself. We can also attach this to the person resource, but this time I'm going to tell it to expect a string called ID. And that will be used as another parameter on the URL. So it'll be the base address, which is 127.0.0.1/5000, because that's our port number, /person/ whatever ID we decide to give it. We'll say def get person. So notice, even though I'm using the same base route essentially, I'm going to make sure that it's a different method name. And then I will put ID in here. Now, I like to use ID for the variable name just because it's indicative of what I'm doing. But if you hover over it, you'll see that it's getting confused with the ID method, which basically prints out the information for the object or the variable itself. So if this bothers you, and it kind of bothers me, you can always change this to person ID, like this, and now it's not so much of a problem. I don't worry about it here because this is just a string. So for get person, I want to make sure that it's actually in our collection. So if it's in there, then I will return rendering a template. And instead of people.html, it'll be person.html. And I'm not going to return the entire list this time. I'm going to say person equals people. And then I'll use the person ID as the index. So it's going to get a single person out of our collection and pass that to the render template method, and it'll render the person HTML file. Else, this is where we're going to use that final method up here called abort. we're going to say abort 404. That is basically a way to throw an error, essentially, from the Flask engine. So when we ask for a person that doesn't exist, it's going to yield a 404 error. This is the correct way to deal with it. In fact, when you're returning render template, we should also return a 200 code after each of these. But let's just keep it simple for right now. And we will generate our new person HTML file. And inside the person HTML file, what I want to do is just indicate that we got the data somehow. So let's go ahead and do another H1, not an H2. And we'll say hello. And remember, it's the double curly braces for Jinja. We'll say first name. And we'll say person. And you might be saying to yourself, oh, what about the space? How are we going to deal with that? Well, because we're actually in HTML, it'll condense all space. If I put 20 spaces in here, it'll condense it down to 1. Okay, the reason the other one didn't work was because it condensed the white space down to nothing. But we're going to, since we're in HTML, it's going to assume that these are 3 different words that need to be separated by some white space. And this is the person.html template. Okay, so we just have something that's going to print, so we'll see the first name and last name. Okay, so we save that file, we save @py, and then it should detect changes. Go back to the web browser, just make sure the people still works. Okay, looks like it's still good. This time I'm going to ask for a specific person. Let's go get John Smith. You can see here now it correctly handled this route. It found the route with the person ID included, and it was able to find it, and it printed John Smith. And it says this is the person HTML file. So we can delete that again, and now it gets all of the people. But let's ask for a person we know doesn't exist. Just put some random numbers in there. And now we get the 404 error, not found. That is pretty much the correct response that we would expect. We could, of course, instead render a different HTML page that's more friendly to indicate, oh, there was a problem, we couldn't find your record. But this gets the point across as well, especially for an academic exercise like this. So we're going to do more advanced template handling, especially when we're setting up a real web application. We need to have templates that represent the entire architecture of our application, so every page will be styled the same. And right now we're not seeing any of that. This is really a rudimentary website, but we can add a lot of sophistication with just a little bit of extra code.